Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mrs. G's Storytime. We are reading the book Patricia St. Tells Her Own Story by Patricia St. with permission of 10 of Those Publishing Company. And we are on Chapter 13, Endings and Beginnings. We should have realized that the opposition must soon start. I had been in the town nearly 5 years, and things appeared to be going well. Perhaps we had forgotten to be cautious enough. Numbers were increasing rapidly, and the dispensary was crammed 3 times a week. 50 to 60 women were coming into the women's meetings on Wednesdays in shifts of about 10 at a time. And the children's work was going on happily. And on Fridays we did our visits to the villages. It seemed like a season of calm weather, and then the storm broke. It started with a summons to Bente, my much-loved fellow worker, to go down to the Danish embassy in the coastal town. She was told that there were complaints about our activities, and her visa for living in the district was canceled. She returned broken-hearted, but was comforted by Psalm 37. On her last day, we went out to a village and came home to find the house spring-cleaned and spotless, with Fatima and all the children installed ready for a party and a farewell service. Bente left the next day to start working in the hospital at Tangier, and I walked home with a strange sense of foreboding. I was summoned next. Being British, I needed no visa, but complaints had been received about our visits to the village across the valley, and I was not to go there again. I thought sadly of those dear women, and especially of the one who had said wistfully, "Is there anyone who can stop me from losing my temper and telling lies?" Would anyone ever tell her again? Zora, the water carrier, arrived a day or 2 later, frightened and very excited. She had been taken to the police station, questioned, threatened, and released. As I went through the market, I saw a soldier seize hold of one of the school children, and I went to her rescue, and he let her go. Then Fatima arrived to tell me of a dream she had had. She had been walking beside a stream when suddenly the water had come flooding over the banks in a dark rush. She had been carried away down the valley and had felt herself drowning, when someone in a white robe had come to the edge of the flood and had stretched out his hand and pulled her ashore. "Something is going to happen," she said quietly, "but Jesus will bring us through." Children were questioned in the market, and there was an ominous sense of impending disaster. And then one day Fatima did not arrive. I set out to look for her and met the family being escorted by police to the local courthouse. We took no notice of each other, but as I passed, Fatima smiled and pointed upwards. There they were all day, and by evening I felt I should go down and see what was happening. They were sitting together looking fairly cheerful, and I was taken into the Basha, the city governor. He was courteous but firm. They appreciated the medical and the welfare work, but all the Christian teaching must stop at once. The group in the courthouse were never to visit me again. A guard would be put at the bottom of the street, and if any disobeyed, they would be beaten and imprisoned. The guard at the end of my street suddenly fell down dead 3 days later. He was rather a nice man, and I felt dreadful about it, but the incident made quite an impression, and no one wanted to take his place. The group kept arriving one at a time very late at night, or in the small hours of the morning, some of them almost seeming to enjoy the adventure, but I knew we could not go on like that. Outside the town, the 2 ladies from Emmanuel Missions had rented a house and were making friends with the people around them. Our lot in time would quietly transfer to them. The waiting days seemed long and depressing. The school was closed, the dispensary empty. I went out to the autumn hillsides and talked to the villagers going to and fro to the market, often treating their deep, painful cracks on their leathery feet. One day, about 2:30 p.m., I was approached by a group of 5, 2 men, 2 women, and a donkey, and I was asked if I would go with them to see a sick man in their home village. I was suspicious. "Where is this village?" I asked. "Near, very near," they replied, "just on the other side of the mountain." The mountain itself looked a formidable barrier, but with its upper slopes of deep pine forest. But I thought we would probably cross over before sunset, and I agreed to go. I had never been to the far side of this particular mountain. We set off pleasantly enough and climbed for 2 or 3 hours. The shadows were lengthening when we plunged into the forest, and the stony track grew narrower. The sunset light blazed through the dark foliage, and we were still climbing. Once or twice I asked if we were getting near to our destination. Near. Oh, very near, they replied. Darkness fell, and one of the men lit a lantern, and we stumbled along in silence, the fir boughs brushing our faces. And then to our right there was a gleam of light in a clearing, a collection of small mud huts lighted by candles and charcoal fires, a woodcutter's colony. Is this the village? I asked, much relieved. No, no, replied the men. Ours is on the other side of the mountain, but it is near, very near. We stumbled off into the inky blackness ahead, and the lantern showed us one step at a time. We had gone some time before I began to realize that something was wrong. The women had stayed behind at the woodcutters' camp, and I was alone in this wild, dark mountain with two unknown Muslim men, going I knew not where. I was really frightened. Retreat was impossible through these black, rocky woods. There was nothing to be done but to go on and to cry out for God's protection. I cannot explain what happened next. It was something I have experienced only 3 times in my life in moments of physical danger and fear. I can only say that suddenly I knew I was perfectly safe. I could almost feel the everlasting arms around me, almost sense the warmth of the shadow of his wings. We came out of the forest, and the night wind was clean and cold on our faces, and the sky above us a blaze of stars. We crossed the crest and began to travel steeply downhill, slithering on the loose rock. We came to a great boulder, and as if it knew what was expected of it, the mule lay down, and the men started unpacking the saddlebags. They handed me a piece of bread and a blanket and told me to sleep against the mule's belly, where his legs would keep the draft off of me, while they would snuggle up against his spine. They sounded as though they were showing me into their best bedroom, and I realized there had been nothing to fear. They were kind men, and they assured me again the village was near, very near. In the morning, we would soon arrive. The blanket smelt of horse and garlic, but it was warm, and I slept soundly, only waking at sunrise to the amazing panorama of crest aglow with the light and glimpses of silver sea, where the heights leveled down to the Mediterranean coast. The men smiled at me and asked me how I had slept. How could I have ever suspected them of treachery? And they assured me that breakfast was in sight. We jogged on down for about 2 hours and traveled through a long defile, and then at the end was the usual prickly pear hedge, enclosing a group of thatched mud huts. We had arrived. I was welcomed with the usual charming hospitality, and fed with pancake bread, fried eggs, and mint tea. The man I had come to see seemed to have a bladder infection, and they arranged to come the next day and collect suitable medicine for him, and for a few other sick folks I was able to see. Afterwards, I tried to talk to them about the good news of Jesus, and they listened politely. But it was no good leaving my little store of Gospels with them, for they assured me that not a single person in the village could read. They begged me to stay and travel with them, but I needed to get back home. I set out alone, got lost in the forest, and arrived back at midnight, weary but very happy. I can't remember much about the weeks that followed, although I know that they were sad weeks. Farnham was urging me to come down to the hospital and start a home and nurses' training school for the Moroccan girls who were interested in Christianity. It was a hard decision, but one small incident seemed to act as a pointer. A homeless boy named Absalom, who had worked with a weaver and slept under the loom, turned up one day with a terrible ulcer extending almost from his knee to his ankle. I knew he needed bed rest and hospital treatment, but he refused to leave his job, fearing he would lose it. All I could do was dress the huge sore, cover it, pray over it, and to my amazement, it started to heal. He came every day and seemed to have great faith in our prayers together. I started to read the gospel to him, and he listened without comment. But one day he arrived very early in the morning, obviously frightened and disturbed. "I've had a dream," he said. "You must tell me the meaning of this dream." I stood at the beginning of a dark road, and at the end of the road there was a cross where Jesus died. I wanted to go to it, but there were enemies hiding along the way, ready to spring out on me and hurt me. But beyond the cross, on the other side, there was a place of safety. Tell me, what does it mean? Did God mean us to lead these ignorant, frightened people to the cross, the world's greatest battlefield, and leave them there unprotected? Beyond the cross was a place of safety. Had the time come to gather some of them into a shelter where they could learn and grow for a season, without fear and distraction? The idea of a nursing school might be a place of safety for some of those young, lonely believers. I went home to England for Christmas and stayed for a short time to think things over. Home was wonderful, but the wealth and materialism of the West seemed a strange contrast to the poverty and hunger of those I had left. Was the spoilt child with his heap of presents really any happier than Hammond with an orange or a biscuit came his way? And where was true happiness to be found? In what we have or what we are? The verse, "In his presence is fullness of joy," became very precious to me, and I started to write Rainbow Garden, where Elaine finds the secret of true happiness. I spent 2 memorable months at the Sheben Mission Hospital in Egypt, watching how they trained girls of minimal education and received much helpful advice. Then, having finally decided to move down to the hospital in Tangier, I went back to the mountains to collect my belongings, only to find that Fatima had continued to gather the poorest children and was feeding them and teaching them in her own home. It was a sad parting. I left on a cold, rainy day and passed little Zora crouched, sobbing in the marketplace. The whole small group found a spiritual home with the Emmanuel Mission outside the town. And that witness continued for some years. My dear ragged little boys were regathered and loved through their early teens by a converted teddy boy and his wife, Albert and Margaret Thomas. In the end, all Christian workers were forced to leave the area, but middle-aged men still inquire eagerly for Mista or Tumush on my visits back, and there was a number of gospels hidden around under looms or in dark recesses of little shops. Sometimes, too, a prosperous middle-aged shopkeeper would be slightly indignant when I cannot at once remember which ragged little boy he used to be. How do we, who work among the Muslims, measure the achievement of those years? A few bodies healed, for a few desolate children the memory that someone cared, and a few, so very few, who came to a living faith in Christ with all that means of suffering and family division. Only 4 remained openly avowed Christians in the years to come, and no church formed. I believe there are some secret believers, but they are known only to God. When I was home on furlough, I got to talking to a lady in a train. She asked me about my work, and I told her I was a missionary nurse. Her comment was as followed: "I think you missionaries do a great deal of harm. These people have their own religion, and by trying to impose your views upon them, you're forcing them into a different culture, dividing them and introducing unnecessary problems. Why can't you leave them alone?" It would be so easy to agree apart from 2 basic beliefs not shared by that lady nor by the TV reporters who have been known to say the same thing. Basic beliefs that transform the issue. Firstly, do we really believe that Christ is so eternally precious that he is worth infinitely more to them than all they may lose or even life itself? Whom to know is life is eternal. And secondly, do we believe in the priceless, measureless, eternal value of one redeemed soul to God? If we do, let us press on. If not, by all means, let us leave them alone. Looking back on the first years in Morocco, I wrote 3 Go Searching, The 4th Candle, and Star of Light, and the biography of Hudson Pope, the well-known Scripture Union evangelist among children. During this time, too, my aunt, Miss Swain, arranged to have my book of verses published. Well, tomorrow we'll be reading chapter 14, The Hospital at Tangier. I love you, I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.